Okay, good morning, friends.
Good morning, sir. Good morning,
We
sir.
are,
Good morning, sir.
please, we are actually going to start our academic journey in real earnest. You see, I'm supposed to teach you a few things, of which I intend to start with Hamlet. Hamlet by William Shakespeare. We all know that Hamlet is a Renaissance text. In fact, Hamlet is often considered to be the greatest flowering of the Renaissance ethos. So, I would like to begin our discussion of Hamlet not with the text, but with the period. Those of you who have not muted themselves, please do mute yourself. Well, I am going to talk about the Renaissance. We all know that even though Renaissance is a term that is applied to many places and many times, when as students of English literature we use the term, we actually refer to a very, very interesting and important period in European history that started roughly in the 14th century and went up to, considering the place that we are concerned with, at some places it began earlier and ended earlier. At other places it began later and ended later. So, all told, we may say that, say, the 17th century ended it. But after that, there was in the 18th century, we all know, the ascendancy of what we call enlightenment and all that. Now, here, by giving you a period wise differentiation, I must be a bit worried. I must qualify my statement by pointing out that these dates and these periods are in a way conjectural. They are not comprehensive. They are not precise even. Because it is often said and justifiably said that in the world of letters, things shape up, things take shape over time. Nothing happens just suddenly. A man may be born or die suddenly. But so far as the larger trajectory of history is concerned, be it political or intellectual, be it social or educational, we have to understand that things do not take place at a given date. They take place over time, gradually. So, any arbitrary indication of a particular date as the starting date of the Renaissance, even a year, even a century, or as the date of demise or dissolution, is liable to be the Middle Ages in Europe were called the Dark Ages. Renaissance meant the awakening or rebirth of learning, of humanist pursuits in Europe after the Middle Ages. It coincided with the birth of the modern period. All these things we have read somewhere, sometime. But because we are students of English literature, because we are now doing this postgraduate course, our discussion of the Renaissance should be nuanced. It cannot be just the parroting of a set of particular dates and events. We have to understand the drift of the age. What happened before, what happened after, why did it happen this way. Who instituted what and where? All these things we need to ponder over, think about. Now we all know that the Middle Ages in Europe began with the downfall of the Roman Empire. Yes or no? We all know that? Do we all know that? Or don't we?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So the downfall of the Roman Empire, about which Gibbon has a very, very interesting book, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. Now, we have in our Indian history prepared answer to a very age-old question. What were the reasons for the downfall of the Mongol Empire? মুঘল সাম্রাজ্যের পতনের কারণ কি কি লেখো? We have read it. Now there are certain general historical lessons that man has imbibed over the ages. One of them is that, what is born has to die. If there is rise, there is fall. The Roman Empire was in a way a victim of its own size and diversity. Hello? When the central authority became weak, when the empire became too vast and unwieldy to be managed, when regionalist aspirations became dominant, obviously the central Roman Empire had to fall down, bite the dust. You have to understand this. Just as when Shashanko became very powerful, the Guptas were destined to fail. Now, what I am trying to point out is the basic fact. that when regional governors became powerful, or there were external aggression from outside tribes like the Goths, the Huns, the Vandals, and so on and so forth. What happened was that the Roman authority was challenged and it ultimately crumbled. Now, in the Middle Ages, what happened was, there was an ascendancy of regional powers. Particular places were governed by, ruled over by chieftains. Particular tribes. There was no very, very strong central empire. Are you getting my point?
Yes, sir.
Like the Greeks or the Romans. In the Middle Ages, there were no such vast empires. And it was also the age of feudalism. You know about that? Samanto Tantra,
Yes, sir.
whereby
Yes, sir.
whereby Jomindars or manorial lords became almost the potentates in a particular place. Men, because the political power was lacking or weak, and it was very fragmented, and because man could not live in a vacuum, the power actually devolved onto the churches. From the political authorities, it was the religious authorities, the church, that began to dominate the Middle Ages. Yes or no? We all know about that, don't we? So, everywhere, the barons, the earls, the dukes, they became powerful. The local chieftains became powerful. And man had to lead a very contented or constricted life. Many of them were serfs. They were bound to the land. They were born and died in the same place as vassals of their feudal lords. They had to give tax to the feudal lords, even though there were titular sovereigns and central powers, like in England, like in France. But in most cases, what happened was, these places were loosely governed. And the national spirit was not yet dominant because there was a lack of central figureheads like an Elizabeth I, like Louis XIV, like Philip II, and so on and so forth. Are you getting my point? A strong ruler was something that was lacking. Strong dynasties were something that were lacking. So these things were there. And you will see that Christianity became powerful. And because Christianity became powerful in large portions of Europe, there was a tussle with another religion, the religion of Islam. And you have heard about the Crusades. The Crusades were a series of battles fought between the Christian hosts, led either by French or English lords, that is monarchs, and the Islamic forces, the forces of Islam, usually led by people like Saladin or Muhammad. Usually from Damascus. And these forces were multinational. People came from far and wide to fight for one religion or another. And what was the issue at stake? Yes, apparently it was fought all about the control of the Holy Lands, the Jerusalem, and so on and so forth. But actually, there are many other issues. There was a threat, whether actual or fictitious. There are doubts in some of the historians. We may at least say that the threat of Islamic aggression on large parts of Europe was one of the reasons for the Crusades. And if you look at what happened in 1453, you can see that the Byzantine Empire was attacked, and the capital city of Constantinople fell. It was annexed by the Ottoman Turks. It was attacked by the Ottoman Turks, and Constantinople became Istanbul. The Turks were in the ascendancy. Now, if external powers, if external forces come to your place and threaten you or threaten the way you have lived for ages, usually what do we do? We flee from that place. And the important figures, the political leaders, the religious leaders, the intellectuals, they fled from Constantinople to the other places in Europe. Have you understood this much?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, if you are a goldsmith and if you have to fly, what will you take with you? Gold ornaments.
Gold.
Yes, gold ornaments, jewelry.
Yes, sir.
If you are a goldsmith, you will have gold jewelry with you. So you will go away with that. If you are a farmer, you will take your agricultural implements because that is what you possess and that is what you treasure. That is what you value because that gives you your bread and butter. Now, if you are intellectuals, what will you fly with? What will you take with you?
Knowledge.
And books.
Karma.
and
Yes,
books,
sir. Also books. Yes, sir.
because these books were the repositories of knowledge. But in those days, books meant not the kind of book that we are familiar with, but scrolls and manuscripts. Because printing in Europe was not very current or very popular. We all know that. Now, you tell me, if the intellectuals fled from Constantinople with their books and manuscripts and settled down in other countries of Europe, they brought with them, obviously, their store of knowledge and their store of books. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
As a result, what happened was there was a spread of the matters contained in those books throughout Europe. And what were those books all about? I'm telling you, I'm asking you. These books were all about two things: the Greek and the Roman corpus. Books on religion, books on sociology. Even the sociology was not a subject current in those days. About society, maybe. About polity, government. About philosophy. About military matters. All these things were taken with them. Is this much clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Now, the medieval man led a very constricted life. They were cowed down by church authorities. As a result, what happened was they were finding it very difficult to be concerned with anything other than their subsistence. In the Middle Ages, man lived in a very constricted condition. There was no freedom. Learning was basically something limited to the exceptional persons from the upper class or the religious establishment. The monks, they read, they learned. The scholars. But more or less, the common masses were illiterate. They didn't know. They didn't learn. They didn't learn much. And this is something you have to understand. Now, when these fellows settle down in the far corners of Europe from Constantinople with their books, they brought with them knowledge of a bygone era. The glorious civilization of the Greeks and the Romans. And this actually led to a new awakening in the interest that man felt in learning, in classical learning. Understood?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Because Greeks and Romans, they were in their own ways masters of very considerable empires. The concept of nation, the Greek nation or the Roman nation, even though there were many city states contending parties and all that, at least this concept of nation also became important. Okay. Now, I have talked about number one, the fall of Constantinople, and number two, the revival in the classical learning of Greece and Rome. I have also talked about other things. For example, the gradual dissolution of the feudal system. Why? Why? Again, there were many reasons. Number one, the gradual ascendancy of the national spirit. Similarly, the gradual ascendancy of the commercial classes, because trade and commerce, these things became freed from, liberated from feudal constrictions. Roads were made, connections were established throughout a particular political entity. Similarly, there was also a peculiar spark in the love of freedom and liberation. And there was also a wanderlust or a wanderlust, a love of roaming, going from one place to another. It led to various sea voyages being made. They wanted to explore the world. Europe was at the center, and they were in search of the new world. The Americas, the Pacific Ocean, the Cape of Good Hope, the sea route to India and China, all these things were being explored. Gradually, the oceans were also being traversed. The Atlantic, the Pacific, the Indian, these oceans were also being charted. New lands were being discovered. New markets were being found. Trade and commerce was on the up. And there was another very, very interesting development. I have told you about the ascendancy of the nationalist spirit. England for the English, France for the French, Italy for the Italians, and so on and so forth. So obviously, another thing took place. The rise of the vernacular. The mother tongue of a landed people, in any locality, the mother tongue of the people, that became important and popular. This was a time when the hold of the great languages such as Latin or French became loose. And vernacular languages like English, like Italian, these became important. Dante wrote the Divine Comedy or Divina Commedia. Chaucer wrote the Canterbury Tales and all that. And in other places also. In Spain, in the Netherlands, in France, there was a spark, there was a new beginning. Great men of letters started writing. Great national leaders started ruling. Great thinkers started questioning the monopoly of Catholicism. Ruled by pomp and splendor, by customs and rituals. Now, you know, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So the power of the churches led to various bits of corruption. For example, the indulgences. You commit a mistake, you commit a crime, you pay a fine, you buy the pardon from your parish priest, your summoners, your pardoners and all that. And you could lead a life with a comparatively freer conscience. This is something that actually galled people like Martin Luther. As a result, an idea of protest became very insistent and led to the birth of Protestantism. So everywhere there was the spirit of interrogation, the spirit of exploration, the spirit of freedom, the spirit of learning. And man learned the wisdom of the great saying of the Greeks. Mens sana in corpore sano, in spirito sano, in mundo sano. Or a sound mind in a sound body, in a sound spirit and in a sound world. So human perfectibility, the fact and the belief that man could improve his lot, man could become the master of infinite perfection. This also gave to the Renaissance man a very, very enthusiastic life to lead. Now, there in this life is no unmixed blessing. When man wants to do many things, he finds his own finite life very, very galling. So the idea of transience, transitoriness, short-livedness, ক্ষণস্থায়ী জীবন এবং যৌবন, your beauty, your strength, your life became infinitely dear to man. But man became also pitifully aware of the fact that his life, his love, his beauty, his strength, these things are very temporary. Ruin hath taught me thus to ruminate, that time will come and take my love away. This thought is as a death which cannot choose, but weep to have it that it fears to lose. So tremendous energy was unleashed. And this was the background to the Renaissance. But as I was telling you, that printing was something that was not there in Europe, and dissemination of learning became very, very costly and time consuming because everything had to be copied by hand. One of the most important technological advances that took place in this period was the printing press. Gutenberg's printing press, you remember?
Yes, sir.
From the movable types. Now this printing press made books easier to print and cheaper to buy. The rise of the vernacular made the knowledge contained in these books accessible to the common masses. And this was another reason why the Renaissance meant a break from the constricted life and thought of the Middle Ages and the embracing of a new way of life and thought. And you will see that man became very, very interested in life, very, very individualistic in his taste, because he began to give importance to his own life, his own thought. No longer was he cowed down by what the churches would have to say. In many places, it led to quarrels, dissensions, like in France, like in the Netherlands. In other places, it led to unspeakable cruelty, like in Spain, by the Spanish Inquisition, for example. But all told, it meant a new beginning. And because national rulers, the kings and queens, monarchy became powerful. whether you are actually being able to understand what I am trying to point out or not. Are you following me? Have you understood what I have been trying to tell you?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Okay. So I will stop my discussion now for the time being. But before I go, I would like to ask you if you have any question to ask. Please feel free to ask me any question that you find relevant, and I will be only too happy to answer them. Is there any question?
Yes, sir.
Okay, if there are no questions, I will request Joyanto to end this meeting and then remove me from the class.
Okay, sir.